Welcome to the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and I am on the mission to change the narrative of immigration, one immigrant story at a time. Well, thank you, Johanna, so much for coming on the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be here and to talk about all of the things.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you here. You are the third author that have
Oh,
interviewed, and it just makes me really excited because I'm a writer and everything. So it's like just having an author here, just sharing, what they wrote about and their immigration
yes.
experience is just amazing to me.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes. Awesome. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, your background, what you do, and then we can get right into growing up with Johanna.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Johanna, and I'm a writer, and I recently released my debut novel. So I'm officially a novelist, which is so fun. I'm also a wife, and I have two little kids. My son, you might have just heard him running down the hallway. He's almost 3, and my daughter just turned 1 year old. So it's been a whirlwind of an experience writing a novel with small children, but it's been good. I live outside of Nashville with my family. I'm originally from Maryland. My parents both are Colombian, and they immigrated to the US when they were very young in their early 20s. And so after maybe a decade in New York City, as most immigrants, immigrate to New York, we moved to Maryland. So a lot of my growing up years were in Maryland. But now I live outside of Nashville with my family, and I write during the day and take care of all of my kids during the day. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so much to get into. Loved all of that. So, okay. So they immigrated first from New York and then moved to Maryland. So how long did you guys live in New York for?
So let's see, because I was about 8 or 9 when we left New York, but I'm the youngest of 3. So that would mean that so I have a sister who's 2 years older and then a brother who's 2 years older than her. So he was probably like 12 years old when we left. So, and then my parents had my brother pretty soon after they got married. So they probably lived in New York City for about 13, 14 years before we moved to Maryland. So I like to say, like, I kind of split my time because when we left New York, I was 8 or 9. And then when I left Maryland to go to college, I was 18. So I was like half and half, half New York, half Maryland. But I remember most of my memories are from Maryland.
From Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's crazy. How was it like moving from the city to then Maryland?
Yeah, I remember me and my siblings being very upset because we had cousins and aunts and uncles, and we just had
Oh,
family in New York. And I remember my mom was like the caretaker of all the cousins. So like my cousins were at my house every single day. And I remember being so angry, like, you're taking us from our family. We all gave my parents the silent treatment. But looking
oh
back,
no.
we were all really upset, but they were trying to find a better life for us, right? That's what they did when they came to the US. And when they decided to go to Maryland, it was because they had some really good friends who had moved to Maryland and were doing better and, had found good jobs, and the cost of living was a lot lower. So they felt like they could have a little bit of relief. And my mom to this day says that Maryland was like the relief that she needed after so many years working like a crazy, like just working like crazy, working 3 jobs, working in the middle of the night. So it was hard on us kids, but looking back as a mother, I know that it was the right decision. And I know that Maryland brought a lot of fruit into our life. So it was all for the best. But in the moment, it was really hard.
Yeah, moving teenagers, I bet. It just reminds me of my husband's story. They migrated to New York and then lived there for a few years. And I think my husband was 14 and he's the youngest. So my
Mm.
husband was 14 and they decided to move to Michigan, from New
Oh,
York to
wow.
Michigan. Yeah. So, and my husband was like, I was just getting into the groove of things, making
Mhm.
friends. And then all of a sudden they decided to move. But same thing is like looking back, the parents were just making the best decisions that they could for the
Right.
family and for the kids. But as a teenager, you don't understand that, right? You're
No,
just
it's all
why are
about
we
me.
moving?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's all about
exactly.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. So your parents, they came together or they met here in the United States?
They met in the US. So funny enough, though, they're both from the same city in Colombia. They're both from Cali, Colombia. But they met while in the US. I think my aunt, my mom's sister, introduced them. But yeah, funny enough, they were from the same country, at the same city, and they were the same age, around the same age when they came, but they ended up meeting in New York City.
Wow. Okay.
Mhm.
So let's get into some of the cultural norms. So, what cultural norms did they keep from Colombia, and which ones did they adapt it?
Yeah, so I would say that definitely the language, obviously, like my parents always spoke to us in Spanish for the most part. Sometimes they would try to practice their English with us, but for the most part, they felt most
Oh,
comfortable in Spanish at home. So that was a huge one. And I'm so thankful for that because although I sometimes probably sound like an American when I speak Spanish, I do speak fluent Spanish and I'm teaching my kids Spanish. I speak to my kids in Spanish. So I'm super grateful for that. And then also, my mom obviously cooked a lot of Colombian foods. We had
mhm.
plátanos and tostones like at least three
Oh,
times a week. She would make us empanadas, arepas for breakfast. So definitely the food, like, and we grew up like going to the Colombian restaurants and drinking like the Colombian soda and the Malta. It's funny because my brother-in-law, my husband's brother, was a missionary in Colombia for 2 years, which is so crazy because that's like, what? I'm from Colombia now. I have a brother-in-law who's lived in Colombia. But he talks about drinking Malta, which is like a malt drink that we love.
mhm.
But he didn't grow up on it, so it's kind of strange to him, and he never liked it. He never understood why people liked it, and we were like,
Yes.
we would go to the grocery store and beg our parents to buy us like a small case of it to take home.
Hmm.
So yeah, definitely the language, the food, the music. Whenever we would have like Thanksgiving and Christmas and parties and stuff, there was always lots of awesome salsa music playing. So I feel like they incorporated almost everything. Sure, there were some American foods that they started to incorporate into our household, but other than that, I mean, I feel like it was a very Colombian household and still is.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Reminds me of a guest she had mentioned. She's like, once you stepped home into our house, like you weren't in the US anymore. You're,
Yeah.
but then once you left, it's like, okay, we're in the US. So,
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
Especially with the food. I love Colombian food. I love the, pan bono and
Yes.
everything and the pan trenza. Oh my gosh, so good. Okay.
So good.
Um, do you know how long it took your mom to visit Colombia after she moved to the United States?
Well, I don't know exactly how long, but I do know it was a while because she did come to the country undocumented. So obviously she couldn't just go back and visit.
Oh, okay.
When she married my dad, she did get citizenship because he got citizenship, I believe, through his father, who
Oh,
was already in the US. So I don't know how long it took her, to be honest, but I do know that it would have been a long time for that reason. But also, it was just too expensive to go back and to
mm-hmm.
pay for flights and stuff. So I know that when each of us was born, each of me and my siblings, she would take us back to Colombia to get citizenship. So we all have dual citizenship. We all have Colombian passports, which is
Okay.
amazing. So I do know that we went at least those few times when each of us was born,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure exactly when she went back.
And the reason why I ask is because it usually is a long time. Once
Yeah.
immigrants come here to the United States, it can be 10 plus years before
Mm,
they actually have the chance to visit their home country. Like you said, sometimes the flights are expensive, and just going grinding on the day-to-day life
yeah.
here is just like you just don't have the time to
You
be able
can't just
to
take a week off,
go.
you know,
Yes,
on vacation. That's
exactly.
really
Hmm.
difficult. Yeah.
Yes. What would you say is your American dream?
Oh, wow. I love that question because I think my American dream is very different from what my parents' American dream was in a
Mhm.
beautiful way. Like I think when my parents came to this country, my mom did come reluctantly, but being in this country, I know that all she wanted was for her family, the family that she would build, to have a better life than she had, right? And I think she definitely accomplished that. And so I think all along she was just concerned about like my children, for them to have a good life, for them not to have to live what I lived through in Colombia, because I think it was very difficult for her to imagine any kind of future in Colombia because she was from the lower income class, and in other countries it's very difficult to get out of that. So anyway, I think that was her American dream. And mine, I feel like it's just different because my children are born here in the US, just like I was, but they also have parents who were born here in the US and who, by nature of being born here, know about the resources, have connections, know
Yep.
people, went to college. And my parents didn't go to college. And so different things like that allow for there to just be more opportunity for our children, which is such a blessing. But at the same time, sometimes I think about how can I teach my children or show my children how other people have it and how their grandparents had it or how I had it, because
Yes.
yes, I had all the opportunity here in the US, but it was very difficult to, for example, when I was filling out college applications, to not have parents that I could really lean on for help because of their experience, because they didn't have that experience. So anyway, I think my American dream is just that my children would know these stories of our families, share them with their future generations. And I think just live a life of gratitude for the sacrifices that have been made for them. And also just to carry on parts of our heritage, even if it's not all of it. I know with, for example, my husband who doesn't speak Spanish and things like that, it's going to be harder, but I think that my children still can learn how to speak Spanish fluently and, enjoy the foods and cook the foods. And so I think my American dream is just that we would be American and be proud, but also be proud of where we come from, where our ancestors come from and all the sacrifices that they have made for us to be here.
Oh my gosh, such a beautiful answer. And you touched on so many things that like I can relate to, because even though we were born here, but having parents who were not born here and not know the resources, and then sometimes not even be able to provide that support, like you said.
Yes.
Like as soon as you talked about the college application, like I immediately went back and was like, yep, I had to figure out how to fill out all that form by myself, not knowing like what I was doing and things like that. And yeah, and it's different for us, like, having to do kind of like more grown up things for our parents because they didn't understand and having to translate and stuff. So, oh my gosh, yes. But I loved your answer. I'm struggling over here with my daughter not wanting to speak Spanish.
How old is she?
She's 9.
Okay.
So when she was younger, when she was a baby, we lived with my parents and my grandparents were there. And so we always talked Spanish, right? And it was a lot easier also for me, like, simple stuff like leche, agua, tener hambre, things like that. But, as she started to go to school, she learned English and now she just only wants to speak English. And then like, even when she was like asking me questions and I would have to like really explain things, it was easier for me to explain them in English than it was in Spanish.
That's true.
And yeah, so now she's just like, does not want to talk Spanish. And I'm like, no, but you need it. And it's so great. The good thing is she does spend summers in the Dominican Republic with her dad. I'm like, that's there, cool. You have to. Yeah, I was like, you have to speak Spanish. Like there's no other way. So she tells me she does speak Spanish over there. And so I'm like, okay, well, at least you're getting that practice in. So
yes, that's a beautiful way for her to be immersed in the culture, even if it's not year round. That's awesome. And I think about that a lot too, because I've had so many parents tell me that their children would like speak the language at home, but once they started school and they were surrounded by other people who just spoke English, it just becomes a part of their world. And so it's so hard to keep it up. And so I've actually been thinking like, maybe, especially in the younger years, maybe I should homeschool my kids, which is crazy to think about because I'm already like so overwhelmed and tired all the time spending 24/7 with them. But it just feels so important to me that they not let that go, because my 3-year-old, for example, does primarily speak Spanish right now, and he knows how to switch. He knows how to go back and forth. But when I think about it, I'm the only person in his life right now who speaks Spanish, because my family lives in Maryland, far away from me in Nashville. And my husband's family doesn't speak Spanish. So, and all of our friends that we play with and hang out with, they all speak English. So whenever it's not just us at home, he's speaking in English. And so I'm already thinking like, I need more Spanish influences in his life, or he's going to just default to what's easiest and to what's most popular around him. So anyway, I hear that story so much of children and I understand it. It's just easier for them. And like you said, even at 3 years old, I try to explain things and I'm like, oh, this would be so much easier if I could just say it in English.
In English? Yes, exactly.
Or like I sound crazy where I'm Googling like how to say this particular word because I don't know how to say this particular word, but I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm just hoping that we can keep it up somehow and he'll come out as fluent.
It's a struggle, and I even wrote a blog post about it, just like a struggle as a bilingual mom, because you do want them to have that language, have that root, that culture, but then it's like, as the generations keep going, it's just like we're so far removed, but our language is really important,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's see here. I would love to get into your book. Okay, so
Oh,
you are the author of An American Immigrant, and it's a fiction book, but it's based off of true stories.
hmm
And like I had mentioned to you before when we met at the book club, was like I have not seen myself so seen in a book
mm
before. And because it was just like so much just from the main character being a writer, and then you just writing about like, oh my gosh, I just want to get things writing, and it had just so many ideas, and I'm like, yes, I feel like that all the time too, and I'm writing and just thinking of ideas, but then just also that cultural tug of like, I'm too Dominican for my friends, too American
hmm
for my family. And that
hmm
was just like, it was just such a good book. So I just want
Thank
to
you.
like, how did that come about? The idea for the book? And yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So it all started when I was probably in my freshman year of college. I was talking to my mom one day on the phone, and she told me this story. And this story is in the book about the time that she immigrated, that she was in the Mexican airport, or in the airport in Mexico City, I should say. And they did like this really intense strip search on her because she was Colombian. So at the
Mm,
time, I think it was in the 80s. And so Pablo Escobar was all over the place, wreaking havoc. And so people were very afraid of Colombians, and thought that maybe they were all smuggling drugs into different countries. So if you had a Colombian passport, they would move you aside, and they would take you to a separate room, and make you get completely naked and body search you. And then not just that, but take you to a hospital and do an ultrasound of your stomach. And so I remember her telling me the story, and I honestly don't remember how it came up, but I was just flabbergasted. I was like, how is this? What? Are you serious? Are you telling me the truth? Did you like dream this? And so once I heard that story, I kept asking for more stories, and I kept just, my curiosity just got the best of me. And every time we were together, whether I was on the phone with her or like visiting her, stories would come up, and I started keeping track of them. And sometimes I would voice memo her. Like I would pull out my voice memo on my phone and record her telling me the story, or I would write it down later on. And I just started collecting these stories, and I was talking to my husband about it here and there, like, wouldn't this be cool? Or if I would share a story with him, he would be like, that would be a really cool book, or that would be a really cool story. So finally, this was many years later that when I started having children and I left corporate America, my husband was the one that encouraged me like to maybe work on that book that I've always wanted to work on, which is just crazy because I've never like really talked about writing novels for a living or doing anything like that. And I was a writer, but a different kind of writer. I was a copywriter. I wrote blog posts, things like that. So for him to encourage me in that, I made me think like, well, maybe I should at least try.
yeah.
And so I took all of the stories that my mom had told me. I asked her for many more. She came to visit me at one point, and we sat down and just talked and talked and talked. And she told me all these stories, and I started to think through how I could tell the story in a fun, creative way. And
Hi, Heidi here. Thank you so much for listening and supporting my podcast, but most importantly, the mission. If you would like to further support this podcast, there are a few ways you can do that. You can sign up for the newsletter. You'll receive the episodes straight to your inbox every time they drop. The link is in the show notes and the show description. You can subscribe to the podcast YouTube channel. And lastly, you can donate money. That link is also in the show notes and show description. If you would like to sponsor an episode or promote your business on this show, send me an email at Heidi@HeidiDeLaCruz.com. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the episode.
and it just crossed my mind that it would be really important to also share the perspective of the second gen, so the perspective of the children of the immigrants, because I don't feel like that perspective is often shared, and
Yep.
it's so unique. It's almost like we're hidden in society, like people,
Yes.
because when we go to school and work, and like people just think we're normal Americans, like they don't think about the fact that like we go home and speak Spanish or whatever. So I really wanted to share that part of it, because my husband also would always tell me like, your upbringing is so interesting and it's so different and unique and inspirational, like you should talk about it, you should write about it. And so I wanted to find a way to like weave these two stories together, these two timelines together. So it kind of turned into what it is now, which is, a young woman, a young journalist who is struggling in her career, ends up in Colombia and finds this journal of stories that her mom has written, and ends up just like learning so much about her mom that she never knew, and growing an appreciation for her mom and for her heritage. and it changes the way that she wants to write, changes the trajectory of her career and so much about her future. So yeah, that's kind of the long story of it.
Oh my God. No, I love it. Three things. One, yes, you're absolutely correct with the child of immigrants, like our perspectives not being shared enough, which is crazy because this podcast is all about immigration stories. And I went to a networking event and I had met these two sisters who have their own online boutique, and they were inspired by their mom who immigrated from Mexico, and she had her boutique, but they helped her mom when they were younger, like run it, like translate and things like that. And when they had heard about the podcast, they were like, would you like, can we be a guest? And I was like, of course, because immigration is not just like the people who come, it's also us,
Yes.
like the
Yes.
children of immigrants. Is like our perspective is different too. Like, and we go through things that, native born Americans don't go through when their parents were born here. Second thing about how, coworkers and stuff, like, they don't think about us like, oh, when we go home, it's like a whole different thing, the different culture. Yeah. I had an experience like that in high school. I was at my friend's house, and I was texting, I think, my dad or a family member. And she was like, she looked at my phone. She was like, you text in Spanish? Like, she was just mind blown that I texted in Spanish. And I was like, yes. Cause like, I'm not going to text my dad in English, but just things like that, like you said, our coworkers and friends, like, don't really think about.
I have no idea.
Yes. And the third thing is like, our parents, like, they had a life before coming to the US. Yeah. I feel like us, the kids, like, we don't really think about that, right? I know, like, when my family gathers together, like, I love hearing their stories of like when they were, in DR, but like how you did that, like how you just like sat down and just like collected these stories of your mom, like that is so precious. And I know that was such a like a memorable time for you guys, because I will listen to my grandma's stories. I will listen to my dad's stories. And sometimes I'm just like, wow, Dad, like you were crazy. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean? But I really encourage anyone who is a child of immigrant to and you have like your grandparents, or you still have your parents or cousins, aunts, whatever, listen to their stories, ask them about like when they were growing up, like how was it, living in whatever country they're from, because it's crazy to just think about all these stories. I did wanted to ask you, like, did she right away, was she on board for you to write the story, or was your mom kind of like hesitant a little bit?
She was definitely hesitant in the beginning. I think she was just mainly nervous about sharing a lot of hard things about her upbringing and about what it's like to grow up, in another country. So she would share stories with me. And then I think as she was like sharing them out loud, she'd think, oh, like, do I really want you to put this in a book or whatever? And I didn't pressure her into anything, but I think ultimately she realized that her story could bring a lot of people hope, because she really came from nothing, and not only came from nothing, but she had a really hard home life, with her father, who was an alcoholic. And I write a little bit about that in the book, but her home life was really hard. Coming to America was really hard. Her first few years here were really hard, with like depression and just feeling so lonely and isolated, and feeling like she had to leave this country that she deeply loved and never wanted to leave, but feeling like she was hopeless in that country. So yeah, it was really hard in the beginning to kind of relive these stories. But I remember her telling me, ultimately, if this story brings people hope that they can come out of depression, or they can come out of a hopeless situation, then I think it's a good thing to share it. And so that really touched me. And I was like, that's awesome, Mom. I agree. And I do think that this story would help people. And I've already heard from so many readers tell me that their favorite stories are Anita's stories, and that they wish that they had more from her. And they wish there was a whole book just about her. And I'm like, that would be amazing. She is incredible. So anyway, she was hesitant at first, but ended up wanting to share as much as she could.
I really appreciated the details of her coming, and then also just how strong-minded she was. Like, she didn't want to come to the United States, and I really like that you included that history of Colombia and how like the Colombian perspective. Because I will admit, like, when I was young and when I had first heard of Colombia, I was told that it was the drug capital of the world. Like, that was what I was like, When I was reading your book and you get into that part, that's what came to mind. I'm like, who would tell a child that about a country, right? Like, so that was my first ever, encounter about this, about hearing about Colombia and anything like that. So I really appreciated those details in that history and everything. And I'm so glad that she, decided to share her story, because you're right, like it is going to bring a lot of hope. I felt very seen in the book. So yes, so it's an amazing book, you guys. I will include the link to it in the show notes and in the description, because it's a really well written story too, just how you connected everything. And then also you shared your grandma's poetry, right?
Yes. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So your grandma was a writer, your mom was a writer, and then so you guys are a family of writers. How was that like?
Well, so I don't know if my mom could be my mom is more so an artist, like a graphic artist. She's a beautiful drawer, like she draws beautifully. But I didn't know that my grandmother was a writer until I wrote the book, which was the sad part, because my grandmother even lived with us for a few years before she passed away. She lived in Colombia, obviously, most of her life, and then she came to live with us. I was probably in middle school, I think, when she came to live with us, and then she passed my freshman year of college. But I guess at the time, I didn't even know that I was a writer. So it would have been, we didn't know that each other were writers, which is really sad, because I wish we could have connected on that. But my mom, brought out these poems in a moment when I was really stuck in the book. I was working on the book and I couldn't get from A to B, and I just didn't know how to bridge this gap. And she goes, "Hey, why don't you look at these poems that I have that your grandmother wrote me?" And I was like, "What? There's poems? Like, you've never told me that she wrote poems and that she was a writer and all these things." And so yeah, she showed me these poems and they were so beautiful. It was hard to pick some, but I found a few that like really fit well with the story. And so it was such a gift that I got to keep them there for the final one.
So I want to talk about the dress. The dress in the book, but then you also had like in real life, you also had a dress made, right?
Yes. So in the book, I write it. So my grandmother was also a seamstress. So she used to make all of her children's clothes, which is crazy when you think about the fact that she had 5 kids. So she was a beautiful seamstress. And so I write about that in the book. And in the book, you see that she fits one of her mother's old dresses onto her for a festival. And so my aunt, who is also a wonderful seamstress, she's my grandmother's daughter, my mom's sister. She asked if she could make me a dress to match the cover of the book, which the cover of the book was inspired by that scene where Melanie puts on a dress. So she made me a dress, and she made my daughter a dress and a couple of my nieces a dress for the launch party, which was so fun that they all got to wear these beautiful like Colombian inspired dresses. Yeah. And I got to like use it for a book reveal on Instagram. So yeah, it was a really sweet moment to have all of my family like really supporting me in different ways. And that was a special one that I'll get to keep that dress forever, which is fun.
Yeah. Oh, so beautiful. And so I want to talk about your writing process, because you wrote this book with small children.
Yes.
How was that? How was that possible?
I don't recommend it. It was a challenge. It was very, very challenging. When I started the book, I just had the one. So I had my son, and he was like maybe 6 months old, 5 or 6 months old, when I decided I am going to take every nap time and just write this book, because it was really hard. But I kept telling myself, the more children come into the picture, the harder it's going to be. So I should just try to do it now while he's still taking 2 naps. Once he's a toddler, he's going to be down to 1 nap. Like, I need to do it now. I felt this sense of urgency. And so every day, twice a day, I would sit down during nap time and write as much as I could. And then sometimes I would also go to the YMCA, which they have like childcare while you exercise. Yeah. But I would, instead of exercising, I would go find like a couch and write some more if I like really had more to write. And thankfully I also have a writers group, and we meet once a quarter. Well, we meet every other week, but once a quarter, we also have a retreat where we meet for a whole day from 9 to 5. And so I wrote a lot of that book in these retreats. Sometimes friends would randomly be like, "Can I watch Micah for you so you can write?" And so I had a lot of one. Yes, absolutely. Or I would go visit my mom or my mother-in-law, and they would help me with the kids while I wrote. So that was awesome. I was able to like finish the whole book and even get a book and like get an agent and a book deal before my daughter was born. So actually I signed my book deal with Waterbrook. And then the next day, my daughter was born. So
Wow.
yeah, it was crazy. Because I knew once I signed that book deal, I knew that I was going to be hardcore at work on this book postpartum with a newborn and a toddler.
Wow.
So again, very challenging. I gave myself, I think like 6 weeks to 2 months with my daughter being a newborn, like not working at all, not looking at the book. And once that was up, I had edits due, like I had deadlines, and I'm a journalist, so I meet deadlines. I don't, I don't ask for extensions. I don't, if someone tells me a deadline, I'm going to meet that deadline. So I was able to find some help for my toddler while I kept the baby with me. So she would like literally sleep on the bed next to me while I wrote on my bed, which was just crazy. Again, I don't recommend it, but I will say mothers can do anything. Mothers are like the strongest creatures. We can endure. We can, if you give us a task, we will accomplish it. We're multitasking pros. So if you don't have any childcare like I did, you can do it, mothers.
Yeah.
You can do it. It's possible. It's hard and it's challenging, but if you really want it, I feel like you will figure out a way. I'm not a night owl. So sometimes I would wake up really early in the morning and write, but I've heard of mamas who would put their kids to bed and then write until 11, 12 o'clock. Yeah. So that's an option too. So it was very challenging, but it didn't kill me. It made me stronger.
Oh, I love that. Wow, what an amazing journey. And
yes.
I know that you had mentioned earlier about you, like in middle school, you didn't know that you were a writer, and you just mentioned that you were a journalist. So when did you know that writing was what you wanted to do?
Yeah, it took me a while because I did study broadcast journalism, but I don't think at the time I connected that was writing. I always thought I wanted to be a news reporter, like I was going to be speaking primarily. I didn't think about it as a writing job, which is crazy looking back because there's so much writing involved in that. So I worked in TV for a couple of years out of college, and then I actually left. It wasn't for me. I didn't enjoy working in TV. So I left and I worked in the nonprofit world, but I was an assistant. So I still wasn't really a writer, but it was in that job as an assistant that I realized that I was a writer. And that was because I was writing for fun on the side. And I remember getting published in magazines a few times and thinking, hey, this is cool. Like I enjoy this. Maybe I could do this. And then a job opened up at that nonprofit for a copywriter, and I didn't know what a copywriter was, but I started learning and they taught me and I got some experience. And that's really when I figured, hey, I'm really good at this word thing. Like I love writing articles and blogs, and back in TV, I was writing scripts, which is writing, they're shorter, but you're still writing. And then copywriting was so much fun. I loved doing that. So I think it was around that season of life where I was taking these detours, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, because TV hadn't worked out. And that was what I was really excited about for a lot of my young adulthood. I thought I was going to be in TV. And so when that didn't work out, I had to kind of figure out what now. And so I kind of discovered it slowly, like little by little, as I got more job opportunities and freelance clients and people just encouraging me and telling me like, hey, you're really good at this, or hey, this was a beautiful blog or whatever. I finally started to realize maybe I am a writer.
Yes.
So it took a long time, but now I'm 100% I'm a writer. I have a book.
Yes. Yes, there you go. Oh, that's beautiful. And no, I ask the same thing for me. Like, when people ask like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? And like, I never had an answer. Never. Yeah. And like, I never thought that I would be like, definitely not hosting my own podcast, but like, writing, having my website and writing articles and stuff like that. And again, like it was, I think when I was like in college is when I realized like my talent is writing. Cause when I would think of talent, I would think of like, singers or dancers.
Yes.
And I'm like, I'm not that. I'm not a singer. I'm not a dancer. So I don't have a talent until I realized like, writing is my talent. Like I'm actually
absolutely
good at this. So that's why I asked, but I love that. Let's back to the book a little bit. What is the core message that you would like the readers to take away from An American Immigrant?
I love that question. And I think I want people, and I think you said this earlier, I want people to look at their ancestors and look at their family and ask questions. I want them to be curious about their families, no matter where they come from, even if they come from a long line of people from Alabama, it doesn't matter. Like our ancestors all have beautiful, important things to teach us, and it takes us asking, because I don't think a lot of times you learn just by living with them. I think it takes us asking about them, asking about what was your life like growing up? What were your parents like? What was your home life like? What did you like to do? What did what did you hate to do? Why did you move from here to there? Why did you leave this country? Why did you stay in this country? All these things are, I think we could learn so much more even about ourselves. Like, I learned so much about myself just by asking my mom questions about herself, and even just realizing, hey, I think I'm this way because my mom did this, or my mom is this way. And it really changed, like, just like the book, where learning about her mom's life changed what she wanted to write about, and it changed what her career looked like in the future. I think it did that for me, and I think it would do that for most people. And it's just important. Like, I think in the book I write something about, we can be so narcissistic thinking that like we're the only ones who matter, when our ancestors have so much to offer us and give us. So I think the core message would be like, your ancestors are important, your family and your heritage is important, no matter where you come from. You don't have to come from another country to be cool or important. They matter. And all you have to do is just be curious and ask questions and see where that takes you.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. And I was going to ask if you have any last words of encouragement, but that was great. I mean, if you do, go ahead, but that was beautiful.
Yeah, I think I would just tell people to just be excited and proud of where they come from. And I know family can sometimes bring up hard feelings, because family is not always beautiful. And part of me wants to change. Like, I have a slogan on my website that says stories about real life and everything in between. And I almost want to change that to stories about messy families and the God who redeems them, or something like that, because
Ooh.
I don't think any family is perfect or beautiful or whatever. All families are messy, and all families have messy histories. And even if that's your situation, if family brings up like hard feelings, that's okay. But I still encourage you to dig in and ask questions and learn, because even my mom, who had a very difficult home life with a father who was an alcoholic, even she has told me that she feels empathy and she's forgiven her father because she knows what his growing up life was like.
Yeah.
She knows what his home life was like. She knows what he went through. And so in a sense, she understands why he was an alcoholic, why he went that path. And not that that's an excuse, but she can have some level of empathy and forgive her father for what he did. So anyway, even if your story is complicated and hard, I think you can find things to be proud of and things to be joyful about. So I just encourage you, no matter your background or no matter what your family looks like, to ask questions and see what you find.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh. Yes, definitely. Ask questions, be curious, learn. There's so many things that you can learn just by asking questions. So I
Yes.
love that. Joanna, thank you so much for this. Thank you for the book. It
Thank
was amazing.
you.
I absolutely loved it. And again, I encourage everyone to read it, everyone to ask, their family questions, find out where your family's from, your ancestors, talk to them, and find these stories. Like this
Yes.
is what connect us, is
Yes.
stories. So
Stories
thank you so
connect
much
us.
for sharing.
Thank
Yes.
you, Heidi. This was so fun. It was so fun to talk to you. Thank you for your kind words.
Oh.